Well, hello there and welcome to my little arty corner of YouTube, of the internet. My name's Angela and my channel is all about drawing really, and the way that I do things, I suppose, but in a way that I hope that you can follow along if you wish, draw along, or get an idea of thought processes or methods, techniques, I don't know. Anything that can inspire you or interest you, and hopefully with some interesting witter along the way. Just to carry on from my last video, and I'll put a link in the box to it as well, is I've now finished this drawing. I did use a reddish brownie, more browny than reddish, to add shadow underneath these flowers and under the stems and in spaces where, like down here, where there's quite a lot of shadow there. And I'm quite happy with that. But what I really did as well was I used a red chalk pastel to add more shadow to the stems underneath the leaves and on these petals or leaves, particularly close to these bits at the top. But what you may see, and I think the camera does pick it up, I also put some of it on top of the gold, and the gold still shines through from underneath. It's a bit more muted, but there's that warm reddish colour which adds interest. I also added some green to these areas, and I didn't do those, and I realise that now, and a bit of shadow along this side to make it feel like perhaps this is receded backwards. I don't think that's worked particularly well, but it is what it is. And I think I'm going to, I added some yellow chalk pastel to these bits as well. I put the white dots you can see are done with a Sakura souffle pen, a white souffle pen, which dries to a plastic, it's quite a hard plastic in its way. It can be damaged, but I was so gentle that I haven't really muted that white or dulled it in any way, and if I have, it would just only make it a very paler version of the yellow. So all in all, I'm quite pleased with how this has turned out. It is something that's quite, I suppose, quite different for me. I've done drawings like this in the past, but it's not something I tend to gravitate towards. I tend to gravitate towards very dense, very complex, very intricate drawings with not a lot of white space generally. A lot of pattern and motifs and things like that in there. But this actually, I really enjoyed doing it and exploring it, and the work with shadows yesterday. Now, I had a request in the comments from since yesterday from somebody who says, you talk about distress ink backgrounds a lot. Can you show me how you paint them? So Nancy, I'm going to show you. And I'm going to show everybody. This will mostly be a video about creating backgrounds, coloured backgrounds on paper to draw on top of. Not to put on after I've drawn. It's preparing the paper for drawing. So I have here a very scuzzy, very used piece of paper, but it'll work fine for this. Even if I pick up a little bit of this on whatever I'm going to use to apply distress ink, I'm not going to worry too much because it all adds to the distressed feeling. And here I've got a load of pieces of, this is Canson Imagine. Put the autofocus on, autofocus lock, so hopefully it will lock on that. If not, we'll soon find out. There's no indication on this camera thing I've got. This is a document camera, whether something is on or off except for the power and the light, except, yes, the light from the camera. So anyway, this is Canson Imagine. It's mixed media paper, and I quite like it compared to other mixed media papers, apart from the Clairefontaine paint on. And I can't find my Clairefontaine paint ons, and I've got them in grey and craft and white. I've put them somewhere safe, and I don't know where safe is. But they're not, they tend, the Clairefontaine has a rougher surface, and it tends to wreck the nibs of my pens very quickly. Canson Imagine is much smoother. It is off-white, so the Clairefontaine paint on is a true white. So this is slightly off-white. I know it doesn't look it on the camera, but it is. And so I've got plenty of those to play around with and to try some things out with. I've also dug out some stencils that I might like to use. I don't know who they're by. I think this might be a Crafters Workshop one, and it's got, you know, various ferny things on. I've got this one. I love these kinds of ones. Let me just move them out the way so you can see them. This one I love. I love these sort of organic, bubbly, blobby things. This one's a bit more regular, but I quite like that as well. And I've got this one, which is this is a Tim Holtz one. I think this one might be a Crafters Workshop. I think it doesn't. I can't see anything. Oh, hang on. This one does have something on there. Oh no, it's a Paper Artsy one. There we go. Has this one got anything around the edge? No, it hasn't. It's the Fern one. So Paper Artsy, like Paper Artsy. Lavinia Stamps do nice stencils as well, but you can buy them online through Wish and things like that, other places. You just look around for what you like. For me, I like things that are quite geometrical, like this Tim Holtz ones. I like ones that are floral. I think it's very much personal preference. And I've chosen stencils that have got patterns that are fairly small, that will work with smaller pieces of paper. So, you know, something like this, you know, there's ways of adding this anyway, even with bigger ones. So I've picked out some of those. I've also picked out some rubber stamps, and these are all Paper Artsy. They've all been cut up into little pieces instead of one big place. You can mount them on stamping blocks, but as I'm using them for background patterns, I'm just going to use them as they are. The other things I have got out, I've got one of these things. These are ink blending tools. This one's by Ranger. It's a Tim Holtz one, although it doesn't say Tim Holtz on there. So they've got a handle, a wooden thing, and they've got Velcro there. And they take these blending foam pads, which have got the soft side of Velcro on one side and white foam on the other. I used to use these a lot because at one time they were the only things really that you had available, but they really caused me a lot of pain in my fingers. I've also got a set of these. These are basically makeup brushes. You can buy branded ones from stamp companies, and they're not going to like me for saying this, but this is exactly the same and they're a lot cheaper. And I actually managed to get a set that had coloured handles so that I can easily see what the colour is on here. I can see I've got brown or something on here, and they can be washed. I'm not in a rush to wash them regularly. I will do if they get a bit too scuzzy. But they're nice because you don't need to use as much. They're easier for me to hold. They don't cause as much pain. But they tend to give a much smoother application of colour, but a very lighter one. And the other thing I like to use is this stuff. You buy it in a big sheet. I just cut it down into lumps. And it's cut and dry foam. This has got an indent in it from the lid of the tin I keep it in with distress inks. So it's a distress ink tin, one of my tins. And so you can see how it's picked up that. Doesn't worry me, it works just the same. And these tins, I keep them in because I like the mini size, because the big ones are just a pain to find what colour you want. And I've got my tins are in sort of like colour groups. I haven't got the latest colours, the 2021 colours, because they haven't come out in the minis yet. They're usually released as a set towards the end of the year, the beginning of the next year. And I can wait. I can wait. So I've got this Canson Imagine paper. Is there anything else I've got? I'm not going to use anything else. I'm just going to prepare backgrounds. So the first job is I will compare a blending foam, cut and dry foam, and the blending brushes on a piece of paper so you can see the difference. Now, I don't know if I do have anything here. No, I don't have. got rid of a lot of these foams from underneath here, because underneath the minis you can actually store these foams under there, so you've got one for each colour. What a pain. Sort of like swapping them over all the time. And you literally just press this in. It does take a while to actually saturate the... You've got to get the foam quite damp before it works. This is pulling all kinds of stuff off the top of it, which is fine. That's what's probably needed. And then you just rub it over the paper and you apply it, layer it up as you wish. This does put a fair amount of ink down, to be fair. So let's see if I can get it just darker along the edge. And it does give, with practice, you can use light hands better, but I tend to be impatient, so I can get that kind of feel to it. Say the only reason I don't use them nowadays is that they're a pain to change over unless you've got a gazillion. See, just popped it in the bottom and that'll save it. I suppose it's best if I put the ink side up so we don't get ink where we don't want it. But if I take the tea dye, I will use this cut and dry foam. You could use that side. That is exactly the same foam as there is on, it's got the same feeling of the foam that's on the foam blending tools. Have a look. It even, I think actually on the foam blending tools the foam is denser. This has got more texture to it. But I use the black side and just tap, 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 tap on there, pick some of the ink up and then apply it. This usually picks up a lot more ink. My tea dye pad is a little bit on the dry side. It needs re-inking and I should have thought about that. But you can see it picks up a lot more colour. Now this is likely to have other colours on there, which is why it looks darker. It's not a brand new piece, so it's going to get some staining. So the blending brush, then it's just a case of loading the brush up with some ink. I tend to load it up and then scrub it off on the paper so that if there is any ink that's really going to stain this, it goes off on the paper. And you can see that this applies a lot less colour. Down here you can barely see it, but it's very subtle compared to the others, which apply a lot more ink. So as I don't want very dark colours to draw on, I like to use the blending brushes. The blending foam is what I choose to use to put ink along the edge of the paper to give a kind of border, and I'll show you that more later. You can do that with an ink blending tool. I just prefer to do it this way. Okay, so let me just colour the rest of this in ish. Because the nice thing about distress inks as well is they're designed to work with each other. So I have got here, I've got my tin of greens, which is now full of greens. In fact, I think I might have had to move a couple of the bluey greens. No, I haven't. It really is green. Oh no, I had to move the greyish, the more grey colours, I think. So a couple of things I can do is I can use a rubber stamp, and distress inks do work okay with stamps because I want to put some interest in the background. Now I could use a brown, but I'm going to use distress ink. I think I'm going to go with Bundled Sage. And here all I'm doing is just tapping the ink onto the stamp, and I will stamp the first lot off a little bit just to take a lot of the ink off. And you can see still how much there is there because it's quite a dark colour in comparison. And all I'm doing is just moving it around, and I may not, it's a little bit there, and it's very subtle, but there's a hint of texture in the background. So that's one way of doing this. another way, and I will use one of these, and I'm going to use a blending brush, and I'll use the bundled sage again. It is one of my favourite colours of green. You just hold the stencil down. You can do this with an ink blending tool, and perhaps I'll show you a difference. And you just swirl it over. Now, I could do the whole stencil if I wanted and then match it up as I move it along, but I don't want to. I just want to bring a little bit through. And you can see the ink has mostly gone and off the brush and from the stencil, so it cleans the stencil at the same time, so I don't bother cleaning the stencils if I'm using a brush. Now if I go for using it with a blending tool, again I need to load this up, and we pick a place where I haven't got any here. You just swirl it over the top the same way, but I find it's a lot darker, and also the pattern doesn't come through as well with these little patterns. You can put it on and press it on the top, and that's a bit better, but they're just not my favourite way of working. Now I've discovered the blending brushes, they work lovely. I could use a piece of cut and dry foam, and here we go, I've got some cut and dry foam here, and that is not bundled sage. There's a lot of it's pine needles or evergreen bough on here, because that's what I used the last time. Just use that just to clean it up a little. And again, I'll pick a place here that I haven't used, and it works. I can, not as well though, because the foam doesn't push down through those little gaps, so it's barely noticeable, it's barely there, it's very, very fine. I can just see it, but it's not the best. So you do need some kind of either foam blending tool or blending brush or stencil brush. Stencil brushes work for this. You just give that a bit of a clean. With wider patterns it works differently, you know, it works better. You can use just about anything with a wider pattern. So that's how I create a layered background, and this was really just a test piece to show you how I do that. I'm going to take some peeled paint, and I'm just going to use some of the peeled paint now to add an edge, and you can see with a juicy, and this ink pad is quite juicy. The tea dye really does need re-inking. Then I can add that as the border, and that will work quite nicely. So let's have a look at how I do this in with a piece of paper that I would actually draw on. So let me have a look. I've got stuff everywhere here, big pieces, small pieces. There we go. This one, I cut down some A5, Can't imagine. I couldn't find my A4, and I do it in a way that I only have tiny pieces of paper left. So this particular piece it's nearly 6 inches long, and it's about, well, it's not about, it is 4 inches wide. So it's nearly 6 inches by 4 inches. And I think that's because I cut off, did I cut off 4 inches? I think I did. I think, yeah, I would have had 2 4-inch squares from the other side. So weird way of cutting things. Do not ask. It's best. Don't. Perhaps that came from a different piece. I don't know. Can't remember how I did it now. I just do it. Okay. We start with a nice blue. I tend to start with a lighter colour and build up, because if you start with a darker colour and you want to use a lighter colour, you won't see the lighter colour. So I'm going to use my blending brushes because they are my tool of choice. I'm also getting a piece of kitchen towel that I can put under my fingers, because Distress ink will react with the moisture on your skin, and you'll leave fingerprints where perhaps you don't want to leave fingerprints. So, and also you end up with mucky fingers. And I'm a bit averse to muckiness, let's say. I can cope with it if I know I can clean up, which I can with this, but I prefer not to get mucky in the first place, because everything gets mucky. I'll leave inky fingerprints over everything I don't want to. But mainly it's to stop me getting fingerprints on my background, which are fine if you fancy a fingerprint background pattern. This is Speckled Egg, which is a very pale kind of, I'm not sure what kind of blue it is. Top shows it as this, but the actual colour is a bit bluer and a bit less grayer, I think. But it's very subtle. So I've got that there. So that's a very light colour. Now I want to add another colour to this. And I think I'm going to go with Weathered Wood. Now Weathered Wood looks like it's going to be a paler colour than this, but it's not. This is where swatches or getting to know your materials are important. But this will be, it's a grey blue, and it's already, you can see how much darker it is than the Speckled Egg, and it is. I'm just going to pop this around the edges though. I'm not going to try and colour the whole paper with it, because otherwise I'll lose the Speckled Egg. And I just spent all that time putting it down for no reason, so I've got that there. Now I want to add some stenciling. So what shall I use? I think I might use this one. And I'm going to use the Speckled Egg, because I want to see if I use this, bearing in mind I've got some of the Weathered Wood on the brush. You can see there, it does darken it. Distress inks you can layer up, and you can continually layer and layer until you're happy with the results. Now I'm adding this, I'm not trying to keep it any kind of shape, I'm just adding it in patches. And so I get this very subtle kind of background pattern. And the way the light catches it, you can see it more or less, so you can see that there. And that will do me. That's enough of a subtle background pattern. But if I wanted to, and I'm going to, I'll take another blue. This is Broken China, which is a more blue. And I'm going to, I can see through the stencil, so I'm putting this stencil at an angle that is off to what I've put down. And so that some of that pattern is still masked and some of it's coloured up, and it just creates a different kind of pattern. In others, you can offset it. So you line it up with the pale lines and then just move it off to one side and either down or up a little, and you get an almost shadowy effect. But I'm just adding an extra shade of blue, I suppose, a bit more interest here, because it was quite subtle. And so I'm just popping this around the corners, just to give that colour there a bit more blue, and that stands out a bit more, and that will be lovely to draw on. Now the last thing I want to do is I'm going to find my cut and dry foam, because I could use blue. I think I will, rather than brown here. The browns do work nicely. Rusty Hinge works nicely with blues, but I think I'll use a blue. So for this one I'm going to use Faded Jeans. I'm keeping this monochrome, all blues. So I'm just taking a little bit off and rubbing it off. I'm going to go back to my, and I am just literally putting ink just on the edge of this cut and dry foam. So I'm running the edge along, so it helps me to control how much I put along the edge. What this does is it frames, it gives you that border, that edge of frame almost. And I also like it because it darkens the edge of the paper a little bit. So again, and it's better if you, I find it works better if we swirl the cut and dry foam in little circles around, and you get a kind of uneven edge, but an edge that is also blended a little bit into. That one's a bit darker than perhaps the others, but it'll be fine because I can blend it out. While the ink stays moist on the paper for a while, it takes a little while for it to sink in and dry. There's something in the ink, like glycerine or something, that makes it a bit, it takes a while to dry. Like this. Now then, something else I can do while I've got my stencil out. I don't like to wet paper if I'm going to draw on it, but I will today because what I've got here is an essential thing for a crafter's stash, a stamper stash. It's a baby wipe, and I should have taken it out and let it dry a little bit because it's a bit damp. But what I can do is use this just to pick some of the colour up. And to create another texture with the same stencil. And I'm not worried that some of it looks splotchy, and I'm going to splotch some when I put this down, because it will all dry just fine, and it will. So I'm going to pop that to one side and let that dry. I need to find somewhere to put this. Down there will do fine, and I'll just pop it somewhere to dry. And that's a background then I can draw upon. So I don't normally like to wet paper. I know that the Imagine will take a little bit of wetness as it's mixed media, but for ordinary sketch paper, I wouldn't do this, not if you're going to draw on it. Try it and see what happens, but it's not something I would do. And baby wipes are great for cleaning stencils if you think you need to, and stamps as well, rubber stamps. It's a bit, bit wasteful. I tend to try and keep them and re-wet them, or use I've got some stamp cleaner that's water-based, and give a spritz of that on an old baby wipe and use it, keep on using it until you can no longer use it, because obviously they are disposable. You can get biodegradable ones now though, I believe, so I shall be looking for those the next time I buy some, but I think I got 2 packs for the price of one, and took advantage of the offer, and they'll last me for a couple of years as long as they're kept sealed and what have you. Okie doke, so there we go. That's my mouse on the floor or somewhere. God blimey. Okay, I'll do one more. I've got loads of paper here, which means I am likely to do quite a few. So I kept that one pretty monochrome, but you can obviously blend colours. And so I'm going to use some pink. I've got this one, which is one of last year's distress inks. It's called Kitsch Flamingo, and it's howling pink. But if I use it with a blending brush, look at the colour of it on there. It's practically fluorescent. But the blending brush makes it very subtle, and what I will do is I will turn this over. Yep, I know there's gold on that side. I use my blending, my sheets of paper until I can no longer use them. I do have blending mats and a white and a glass mat I could do this on, but then you've got to wipe those down every time you use them, whereas if I use a piece of paper, I'm not too bothered about picking up ink, because there's so little ink from the blending brush. It looks like there's a lot, but there's so little that even if you pick a little bit up, it's not going to affect the colour too much. I've just turned it over so you can see what I'm doing just a bit better. So that's Kitsch Flamingo, which is a howling pink. In fact, all of the colours for 2020 are all really quite bright and vibrant. They're not so muted. I do want to mute this a little bit, so I'm going to use Victorian Velvet, which is, for some reason, I have 2 cubes of these. I suspect I picked one up on its own, and then the other one came in a set as I was adding to them and completing a set of distress inks. They are very addictive once you get into them. So I'm just going to use some around the edge because it will mute that howling pink down just a little bit. It is a lovely colour. Now, if you do decide to get distress inks, oh, and by the way, there are so many ink pads out there for craft. Some are permanent, like archival. Others are waterproof. Companies sell their own. Crafters have their own branded versions. Some companies sell many versions branded by crafters' names. Whatever you do, I would suggest creating a swatch sheet for your sketchbook or notebook. So you just put swatches of the ink down, more or less like I'm doing here, but on a smaller scale. And you can do it also by just taking the stamp pad, ink pad, there's the Kitsch Flamingo, and literally, it's a piece of paper, popping it down and just giving it a bit of a twist, and you get some of the colour out. And here you can see just how howling bright that is. Because there were drops of ink on there, I'm just using a brush to blend it out. But it gives you an idea of the colour then on the paper. And for different papers, strictly, you should do swatches as well. But I find with distress inks that actually their colours stay pretty much consistent. That's my blue one. Yeah, so pop that one back in. That's what we need to do. So I said last one I did was pretty much monochrome, but I'm going to make this a bit more colourful, which means I'm going to grit my teeth as I work with colour. But what I thought would be quite nice would be to use something like this. This is dried marigold. It's one of the oranges. And, oh, orangey yellows. So I've got oranges, sort of, kind of oranges, yellows and yellowy greens. Oh, there's my crushed olive. I've forgotten I had that one. Because as colours come out, some of my tins are overloaded and I forget that I have these colours, and I do like crushed olive. But marigold, it's a lovely sort of, it's quite a dusty kind of orange. I can't describe it any other way, but it's got that feeling of dried marigold flowers where they go, yeah, because it's called dried marigold, but it does feel like that, where they go almost papery and faded, but more intense. Some colours are a bit more intense. It really does feel like that. So popping that round the edge, I've gone from pink to now a pinky, orangey, well, orangey, pinky red colour, which is quite nice. And I am going to use, get a different stencil, because I think I might use that dried marigold to stencil on here. Because remember, through the stencils, these will show up just that little bit more. They do fade back a little bit as they dry. So all I'm doing is I'm using the same size fern here, and I'm just moving it around the paper, roughly around the edge, so it creates its own little border. But I'm not worried about getting the whole leaf on. I'm using whatever parts, and if it overlaps like it just did there. And I do have quite a lot of ink on here, and perhaps I will get one there, and perhaps just a little bit there. So completely different kind of pattern, but I can live with that one, to be honest. I think that'll be just fine and dandy. And what I do need to do with this, you can see the orange that's stuck there. There's quite a lot on there. So I'll just use a piece of this to pick the worst of it up. The only thing this really needs now is an edge. And I am going to go to the browns. Just give that a quick clean. And I think I'm going to use Vintage Photo on this one. Aged Mahogany would be quite nice because it's a redder brown. So I'm looking here and I'm thinking, no, I don't like that with that, but I think I might like, I think that one would work a bit better. And it is quite an intense colour. So I do want to be very light-handed and just try and keep the colour almost to the edge. And yes, you did see me swipe it up and down just to make sure I get the colour right the way along the edge, but just a little bit. It depends what kind of effect you want here. There we go, that'll do nicely. The more you use the cut and dry foam as well from dry, the more ink there is there and the less you'll actually need to re-ink it to do an area. That makes sense. I'm not sure I'm explaining myself well. But there's another one ready to draw on. Not my favourite colours, but nonetheless I shall make use of it. And perhaps, because those are what we'd call, I suppose, analogous colours. So let me go and use something, perhaps some colours that are quite different. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to go to the pinks and purples again. And I'm going to pick out, I'll use Seedless Preserves. Seedless Preserves, again, is one of my favourite kinds of colours. It's a lovely purpley pink, but I don't want too much of it down because it is really rather an intense colour. And I'm looking for subtlety because I'm going to draw on the top of those. And I use black, so black will always stand out. But if I want to add watercolour or use distress inks like watercolours, then, or any water-soluble medium, the distress ink gets picked up and it colours whatever you're adding to it, which is fine if that's what you want it to do. It will, depending on the colour, you can get quite a distressed look. So, and that's what distress inks are about. They're called distress inks because they give this, it's easy to get this distressed, grungy kind of look to them. You can't really call it grungy in some ways because the colours are so beautiful. I do love them very much. Okie dokes. So I'm going to use a colour that you wouldn't normally put with this. And I'm going to use Evergreen Bough. Because green and purple, and green and reds are opposite one another on the colour wheel. And when you mix them, you often get very mucky colours. But I'm just going to use this in a very light kind of way. Quite light-handed with it. Very subtle. And it creates a kind of greyish green. Now, I've never used these colours before. Analogous colours are colours that are next door to each other on the colour wheel. So colours like red, orange, yellow, or magenta, red and orange, or green and blue and greeny blues, turquoise, and those kinds of colours. Complementary colours are opposite each other on the colour wheel. So things like purple and yellow, green and red, blue and orange. And when you mix them, you get an unpleasant colour generally. But I'm doing this because it grunges everything up. And it does, just that bit. You can see already how mucky in some ways this looks, but it's mucky in a colourful kind of way. And I haven't tried to add colour particularly evenly I've left bits where they're darker and lighter and so on, because I want that kind of feel to them. I'm also going to add some iced spruce, because iced spruce is actually more of a grey than it is a green. But it will, I'm going to use that just for the edges. I'm not picking much up here, which is just to add that difference in tone. Again, around the edges where it's just that little bit on the muckier side. And I think I'll use that to add the edge, oops, as I flip it over. Look at that, flipping heck. Once you've added distress ink to the paper, you can actually blend the ink if you make mistakes like that very quickly. I'm just going to take some of this around the edge. This is a very unusual colour combination for me. But I actually quite like it, even though it's ending up looking a bit, it does look aged and worn, which is fine by me. I can live with that. So I've got that. But I want to add some stencils to this. So I'm going to go to my reds. Just move some pots out the way. I've actually got 6 of these trays of distress inks. So I think, I'm having a look here. I do have this ripe persimmon, which is an orange, but I think I want to go more to a red. I've got abandoned coral here, which is more of a pinky kind of red than it is a red. It's more on the pinky side, and I think that might actually fit in quite nicely with this. Do you know what? The worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have used up a bit of paper, a little bit of ink and a bit of time. Ooh, right, okay. And I am adding just tiny little bits, just the littlest couple of swirls round, just to add some of this in here. And I'm choosing to use the same kind of pattern of spots there and this one here, just to add that to the background. And actually that works quite nicely. It's interesting colour combination. It's not one I would ordinarily do, but I will make use of this. So that's worked quite nicely. And I think again what I'm going to do here, I'll get that tissue paper and I'm just going to dab tissue paper. It's not tissue paper. What is it? Baby wipe. I'm just going to dab a little bit through here, just enough to pick up perhaps some of the spots or lighten them. Distress inks are water reactive, so water will always mess with them and cause them to move. I say mess with them. We'll work with them or play with them. And just something simple like that means you can lift the colour up. So you can also spray with water. Have I got a spray here handy? I do. No, I'm not going to do this on screen because I have water all over my desk, my computer. But I'm just using a very old distress sprayer. Yeah, I know. Sort of like any kind of spray bottle will do. You can get loads of different ones, even a garden sprayer. But as long as it gives a fairly fine spray, a plant mister. So can you see I've just got a very fine spray of water on here. Yeah, so I'll just leave it for a little while. And then a couple of things, I can either leave it dry like this, because as it dries I'll get water spots. I could use a heat tool or hairdryer on this to speed up the drying process. But what this does is it sort of bleaches those areas out. But what I also can do is just get some kitchen towel and just dab up some of this, and it will lift the ink off and it leaves water spots there. So, and that again will need to be left to dry. There's not a lot of water on there, so hopefully it won't upset the surface of the paper too much, but it gives that kind of look. Okay, One last one, because I haven't done much with the stamps, have I? I haven't. Actually, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give this one a bit of a spray, because I think this one will benefit from those droplets of water. The nice thing about the distress sprayer is that if you're careful, you can actually get bigger spots of water rather than a fine mist. And that's what I want to do here, because if I can lift some of this background colour off, it'll lighten it up a fair amount, which is what I'd like to do. Again, just leaving it there for a little while, just so that it's got a chance to mess with water. Actually, I quite like that. Just dabbing the water off. I've missed, there's a bit there, I think that's where my finger was, so I'm going to do the same there, where my thumb was. There we go. So you can see on the corner how there's quite a lot of water there, but I'm not leaving it to soak in much to the paper. I'm lifting it off before. You can see how much ink has come off, how much ink there was on there. But you can, I quite like that. That's worked out quite nicely. And the other thing I think is this test piece that I did will actually work out quite nicely. And I'm also going to give this a quick spray. Oh, shoot, I've just broken my sprayer. Forgot to unlock it. I think it'll be fine. Yeah, it will be. I'm sure I can fix that. Yeah, of course I can. There we go. It's not spraying as well as it was, but it'll be fine. So I've got that there, and I just need to give it a quick spray on that corner where my, oh, it's working fine now. And it's bending because I've added a lot more water to this one than I would normally. I need my paper towel out quite wide so I can pick all of this water up quickly. And you'll see there's a lot of the colour is bleached out. But where I've added a lot of colour, there's not so much. Now this will need a serious amount of drying. It will dry flatter. It will. The other thing that I could do if I wished is once these are dry, I could actually go back with more distress ink over the top and cause this to disappear into the background. But I'm not likely to. The other way to stop this curling is to spray the back, because this side is dry and the other side's damp. So the way that the paper fibres work, stretch, contract and expanded on the top side. So the paper fibres have got longer, so it pushes them. You can see, look, as it's drying, it's just going down. So with a lot of talking, a lot of fussing around, talking about my other paper, I've managed to colour these 4 in it was probably about half an hour with a lot of talking and fussing and fiddling and what have you, and explaining and showing. But you can see just how easy it is to get lovely backgrounds with, I use distress inks, but as I say, there are many other brands of inks out there. Distress inks are water reactive, other inks are water reactive, some aren't. Pigment inks tend not to be. I think distress oxides are perhaps the only exception to that. And yes, I do have some distress oxides, but they're not my favourite for colouring papers if I'm going to draw on them, because I find the surface has a lovely velvety feel to it, but it's just, the pens just don't like to draw on it. It tends to, I find it clogs the nibs up. Perhaps that's, I'm getting confused with something else. I ought to try it again at some point. But I hope this has helped you. I hope you found it useful and helpful, and that going forward, I'll just take those off. Perhaps I can arrange them without that paper behind. Let's have a look and see if we can get a pretty arrangement of these, is it? There we go, that'll do fine. Going forward, consider it, I've got a whole set of them because I was using them so much at one time when I was digging and delving into the realms of card making and mixed media and so on. But you don't have to buy them all. You can just pick and choose. Browns I find the most useful because for me personally, I like the brown backgrounds, the tea dye or rusty colours with a darker edge. And those are nice. The little mini pads are perfect for this. You buy them in sets of 4, and so you can choose a set that appeals to you just to try. You can get the bigger ink pads, but they have their own problems then in storage. These don't take up so much space. And you can buy the special tins to store them in. You can buy other things to store them in. You could just even have a pretty storage box of one kind or another to keep them in. And just to recap, the different tools I've used cut and dry blending foam, and I've got no idea which one this is from, so I'm going back through everything. No idea. I think it may have been. No idea. It's okay. It's a bit scuzzy. It can go out. I will work it out. Cut and dry foam. I've used one of these blending tools with the foam pad. Of course, I've put the foam pad somewhere and I don't know where on there. And my favourites are blending brushes. Very soft, fine bristles on one end, or on the brush end. The handle and everything makes it quite nice and easy to hold. It doesn't hurt my hands, wrists and fingers like these do. And there are plenty of other blending tools out there. These are just the ones I choose to use. You can get stencil brushes, which tend to be stiffer. I don't like those, especially as they're also often made from animal hair, bristle, hog bristle or whatever it is. I'm not keen on that, vegetarian. Verging on the vegan at times, I think. I've also used a rubber stamp. I used that in the very first one here. Didn't use the others because I much prefer to use, me personally, prefer to use stencils. So, and there's so many of these out and available from so many different places. I don't know if all of these that I've shown you are still available because I've had them in my stash for years. And I do mean years. It's got to be well over 5 years, most probably longer. And so I hope this has helped, especially Nancy who asked. No drawing today. I'll keep these and I'll come back to these on another day. If that's okay. That's probably tomorrow. So until then, look after yourselves, take care, find time to be creative, and I'd love to see what you do. So if you post it on social media, tag me. My @, my social media tags are at the end. It's mostly Artwyrd because that is me, and that's what my arty business is known as. But I'd love to see. So don't be afraid of showing me. Everybody works in their own way and at different stages of development, and I was a teacher for a long time, and I tend to be able to see the beautiful in anything people do, just about. Within reason. Some things just aren't beautiful. I'm not talking about art necessarily here. I'm talking about life. But yes. So thank you. Take care for now. Bye-bye.